Get ready for the most gripping twist in our tale, a sudden clash between a determined ex-military canine handler and a rowdy biker crew in the middle of what should have been a peaceful afternoon. In this story, Harper Caldwell stands her ground with unwavering composure, her trusted German shepherd, Nova, by her side. At first glance, it's an ordinary scene in Cypress Park, families strolling, kids playing, birds chirping, until the roar of motorcycle engines shatters the calm. Tension escalates, and Harper's military instincts spark to life, leading to a standoff that will have you on the edge of your seat. Will she maintain control, or will the bikers push her too far? To find out, be sure to listen to the whole story and discover the powerful ending. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, please subscribe to our channel and support us. Your encouragement fuels more exciting tales just like this one. Harper Caldwell walked at the edge of Cypress Park, her boots pressing lightly into the soft ground as she surveyed the afternoon bustle. Families dotted the manicured lawns, children with brightly colored kites tugging at long ribbons overhead, and elderly couples strolled arm in arm beneath the shady canopies of tall oak trees. A warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, reminding Harper of simpler days before her life became intertwined with high-stakes missions and the constant hum of vigilance. Yet, despite the casual, almost tranquil setting, an undercurrent of tension flitted at the corner of her awareness. It started with a guttural roar of motorcycle engines somewhere behind her, a sound that stood out sharply against the otherwise peaceful backdrop of the park. At her side, Nova, her German shepherd, moved in sync with Harper's measured stride. Nova was more than a pet. She was a partner, a protector shaped by shared trials that few in this park could fathom. Both dog and handler had learned to sense trouble long before it fully manifested, a skill honed during their days of military service. Harper's time overseas as an ex-military canine handler had taught her the importance of reading an environment quickly and accurately. She felt the subtle shift in the park's atmosphere the moment the motorcycle's distant rumble became a commanding presence. Despite the mild weather and bright sun overhead, Harper tightened her grip on Nova's leash. A flicker of annoyance surfaced in her mind. She had come here seeking a quiet respite, a normal day out in a place she considered safe. But that fragile sense of calm was at risk of being overshadowed by what she sensed looming on the horizon. She briefly closed her eyes, recalling the dust-swept roads of Afghanistan, the incessant need to remain on alert in areas fraught with hidden dangers. This park was no war zone, but she could not entirely dismiss the instincts that had kept her alive in far less hospitable environments. Scanning the scene, she caught sight of a cluster of bikers gathered near a park bench, the glint of sunlight reflecting off their chrome handlebars and the patches on their leather vests. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard, seemed to be the center of attention. He wore his authority like a personal badge, his stance and sneering expression radiating confidence. She did not yet know his name was Slade, but she noted him instantly as the one in charge. With a single nod to his companions, he triggered a low, mocking laugh that hung in the air, overshadowing the park's usual symphony of casual chatter and playful squeals. Nova's ears perked in response, her posture shifting from casual to alert. Harper let out a slow exhale, reminding herself there was no immediate threat, just a group of bikers passing through. Still, something about the way Slade and his crew surveyed the area, their voices occasionally spiking in taunting tones, made her uneasy. If they were looking for a target, she resolved that she would not be the easy mark they might expect. From her vantage point at the perimeter of Cypress Park, Harper studied the bikers more closely. They were a ragtag group, some sporting heavy jackets with frayed patches, others wearing sleeveless denim that showed off colorful tattoos winding down their arms. She noted a subtle hierarchy. Slade occupied the center, drawing the eye with a natural, if menacing, magnetism. The rest formed a loose ring around him, occasionally flicking their gazes across the park as though hunting for mischief. Parents and children were still enjoying the day, but Harper sensed a shift in their demeanor as well. People began to steer clear of the bikers, guiding little ones away from the area in case the men turned rowdy. The rumble of idling motorcycle engines occasionally cut through the typical sounds of the park. Laughter, bicycle bells, and the rustling of tree branches in the wind. The presence of the bikers became an unmistakable undertone of tension, and Harper's instincts told her this could escalate at any moment. Nova, fully attuned to Harper's body language, stayed close. Her muzzle lifted as she sampled the scents in the air, and Harper could see the concentration in the dog's eyes. Alert, investigative. The German Shepherd had accompanied her through military deployments, learning to read not only physical cues but emotional shifts in Harper. It was an incredible bond of trust and vigilance, forged under stressful circumstances that most parkgoers could never imagine. Harper considered her options. A prudent person might have decided to leave the park, quietly slipping away and avoiding conflict altogether. Yet something inside her bristled at the notion of being driven out of a public space by the looming threat of harassment. She'd fought for years to protect the freedoms of others, and that extended, in her mind, to the simple privilege of taking a peaceful walk with her dog. If Slade or his crew decided to pick a fight, Harper would respond accordingly, but she wasn't about to run at the first sign of trouble. Her eyes briefly drifted to a couple of teenage boys skateboarding nearby, seemingly oblivious to the bikers. She worried for them, for the families scattered around, and for anyone who might be an easier target than herself. That sense of protective responsibility flared in her chest, a reminder of the old code she lived by, to guard the vulnerable. Nova offered a reassuring nudge against Harper's leg, as if echoing her thoughts. We watch over them. Harper took another step forward, heart steady but pulse elevated, approaching a broader pathway that curved toward the center of Cypress Park. She hoped the bikers would remain content with laughing among themselves and revving their bikes to show off. But deep down, she suspected men like Slade rarely let such an opportunity, an ex-military handler standing with her dog, pass without at least testing the waters. Harper hadn't even covered half the distance toward the central pond when the group made their move. She heard a sharp whistle, likely a signal, and then the echo of mocking laughter that followed. Slade sauntered forward, separating himself from the cluster of motorcycles. The hint of a smirk pulled at one corner of his mouth, and his gaze locked on Harper as though he'd already singled her out. "Nice dog you got there," he said, voice carrying over the murmurs of the park. It was loud enough that people turned their heads to see what was happening. He didn't wait for her response before adding, "Bet you think you're real safe walking around with that mutt, huh?" The sneering tone made Harper's shoulders tense, but she maintained a calm exterior. Nova, on the other hand, issued a low growl that rumbled in her throat, quiet but unmistakable. This caught the attention of Slade's closest associates, and they exchanged amused glances. Harper recognized it as the posture of bullies delighted by the prospect of an altercation. Keeping her voice measured, Harper replied, "I'm fine walking anywhere I please." She allowed just the barest hint of an edge to creep in, a subtle warning that she wasn't as easy a target as Slade might assume. Slade sized her up, his grin inching wider. "Feisty," he drawled, glancing down at Nova. "But dogs don't scare me, and neither do their owners." Harper felt the weight of her military training pressing at the back of her mind. Assess threats quickly, minimize collateral damage, maintain composure. She flicked her gaze to the side, noticing families still within earshot. The last thing she wanted was a scene that put bystanders in harm's way. Yet her own instincts told her that appeasing a bully was rarely the way to end a confrontation. Nova's growl gained a fractional increase in volume, and Harper signaled her to hold steady by tightening her grip on the leash. She wasn't about to let Slade provoke Nova into lunging. Through countless drills and real-world missions, Nova had learned discipline, and Harper trusted the dog's restraint. "And neither do I," Harper responded, meeting Slade's stare. The hush that followed felt electric. The breeze kicked up a swirl of leaves near their feet, amplifying the stillness of the rest of the park. Slade didn't move, as if gauging whether to press further or back off. His men hovered behind him, leaning on their motorcycles or crossing their arms, each waiting to see if he would issue an unspoken command. Harper held her ground. She suspected this was a test of wills, the kind of confrontation Slade likely used to boost his reputation. She had no intention of flinching. The tension hanging in the air began to draw onlookers, including a few teenage girls who stood near a line of bushes, whispering among themselves. An older woman paused her power walk, eyes flicking worriedly between Harper and Slade. A father quickly ushered his young daughter away from the confrontation, providing a wide berth around the bikers. Meanwhile, Slade's sneer never wavered as he reveled in this small audience. Harper had been in standoffs before, some life-threatening, others mere flashes of intimidation. Still, she felt a familiar coil of tension in her gut, as if her body remembered the dusty outposts and nighttime patrols where complacency meant potential disaster. She also sensed that Slade was used to people cowering or falling silent, giving him the reaction he craved. When she refused to look away, he raised an eyebrow in mock surprise. "You should listen to your own advice," Harper said, letting the words hang. "I'm just here walking my dog. You want to stir up trouble? Pick another place." She paused, feeling the thud of her heartbeat, making sure her voice didn't tremble. It didn't. The bikers behind Slade snickered, nudging one another. One of them, a scrawny man with a skull tattoo on his temple, spat at the ground near Nova's paws. The dog stiffened, ears snapping upright, but Harper kept her hold on the leash firm. Slade glanced at the spittle on the grass and then looked at Harper. "Seems like my buddy here doesn't like dogs," he muttered, feigning innocence. "Or maybe he just doesn't like the people who walk them." The words were laced with a challenge, an invitation for Harper to snap back. Beneath her cool facade, Harper felt her irritation spike. She could deal with insults aimed at her, but messing with Nova crossed a line. Drawing a slow breath, she reminded herself that she had learned to handle far worse antagonists. "Then your buddy should learn some manners," she replied, voice ice cold but calm. "We've got nothing to prove, and neither do you." Slade let out a sharp bark of laughter. "Is that right?" He glanced around at the small crowd gathering. "Looks like I got an audience to impress. Shame if the show ended too soon." With that, he took a single, deliberate step forward. Harper's muscles tensed, but she didn't step back. Her training taught her that retreating might embolden a bully. Instead, she squared her shoulders, aware of Nova's growl growing more distinct. She managed to keep her tone measured. "You should remember there are kids and families watching," she said. "This isn't the place for your bravado." Somewhere behind the line of onlookers, a voice shouted, "Someone call the Chiefs!" Instantly, a ripple of alarm passed through Slade's men. They glanced at each other, and their laughter faltered. Even if they liked to instigate fights, they might not be keen on tangling with the law. Slade, however, retained his sneer, narrowing his eyes at Harper as if weighing whether to risk it. The moment someone mentioned the police, a hint of caution flickered across Slade's face. Harper seized on that hesitation. She knew that Slade's posturing depended on an audience and a sense of relative impunity. If the cops actually showed, it could unravel his intimidation tactics in front of his own crew. But bullies rarely concede without a last-ditch display of bluster. Slade fixed Harper with a glare and muttered, "You think the cops scare me? I've been around the block enough times." His bravado rang hollow, though. The mention of law enforcement often introduced an inconvenient reality. No matter how tough you think you are, an arrest or fine can bring your show of power crashing down. Nova, alert as ever, continued a quiet rumble in her chest. The German Shepherd sensed the shift in tension, and while Harper didn't want to escalate things, she also knew that a well-timed demonstration of Nova's capabilities might dissuade further aggression. Back in their military days, a single command could trigger Nova into rapid, precise action, but Harper had no wish to unleash that level of force in a public park unless left with no other option. "Suits me fine," Harper said, keeping her words minimal. She let the tension in the air linger, aware that Slade's men were growing antsy. She could almost see the gears turning in their heads. Stay or go, risk or retreat. The father who had walked his daughter away moments before now lingered on the edge of the crowd, phone in hand, presumably ready to dial 911. Slade's eyes swept over Harper one last time, as though memorizing her features for future reference. His gaze flicked to Nova, the dog still poised and unyielding, and then to the uncertain cluster of onlookers. Finally, his sneer returned, but it carried a reluctant edge. "We'll handle this another time," he said in a low tone, stepping back. He raised both hands, feigning innocence. "Wouldn't want to upset all these fine, law-abiding citizens." With that, he turned on his heel and strode back to his motorcycle. His crew followed, throwing disdainful looks at Harper, some muttering curses under their breath. The roar of ignition cut through the hush, and one by one the bikers pulled away, leaving a lingering trail of exhaust fumes and rattled nerves behind them. Harper remained rooted to the spot, heart pounding with adrenaline. She let out a measured breath, keeping Nova's leash firm until the last of the bikers rounded the corner. Only then did she allow herself to relax slightly, shoulders easing from their rigid set. The onlookers began to disperse, relieved that the confrontation hadn't become physical. Harper sensed that many of them were still on edge. She could see it in their cautious movements and tentative glances. Even though Slade and his gang had departed, Harper couldn't completely quell her awareness of potential danger. She remained standing there in the middle of Cypress Park, Nova close at her side. A mild breeze rustled the leaves overhead, offering a reminder that life went on, that children still played and couples still strolled hand in hand. The bikers had come and gone, yet a residue of tension clung to the atmosphere like smog after fireworks. One by one, curious onlookers trickled away. Some offered Harper a nod of approval or a brief word of thanks for handling the situation without a brawl. Others just hurried past, eager to forget the uncomfortable moment. Nova nudged Harper's leg, and Harper stooped down to give the dog a reassuring pat. "Good girl," she murmured, her voice laced with genuine gratitude. Nova had served as both deterrent and psychological support, a grounded force that helped Harper keep her composure. She had just begun to consider leaving when a figure approached from the side, careful not to startle her or Nova. It was a man around his mid-30s with a sturdy build and a steady gaze. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a worn jacket, the corners of his mouth turned down in concern. Harper had noticed him earlier, hovering near the fringes of the conflict, his posture shifting as though deciding whether to intervene. He raised a hand in a half-wave. "That was something," he said, keeping his voice low. "You handled it well." Harper straightened, resting a hand on Nova's back. "Could have been worse," she replied. "They didn't actually start a fight." He nodded, glancing briefly in the direction the bikers had disappeared. "Name's Marcus Bradley," he offered. "I come here to jog sometimes." "Didn't expect a showdown like that in a public park." Nova's ears twitched, but she remained calm, sensing no threat from this newcomer. Harper eyed him for a moment, then introduced herself. "Harper Caldwell," she said. She didn't volunteer much more, not yet at least. Old habits from her military days made her cautious about revealing too many personal details to strangers. Marcus seemed to pick up on her guarded nature. He glanced at Nova. "Dog's well trained," he commented, respect evident in his tone. "Never seen one so disciplined." Harper gave a faint smile. "We've been through a lot together." She considered adding that Nova was a former military canine partner, but decided against it. Let him assume whatever he liked for now. After a day like this, trust was in short supply. Marcus shifted his weight. "I thought about stepping in, but you looked like you had it under control. Didn't want to make it worse." "I appreciate the thought," Harper said. "But you're right. Sometimes too many people jumping in can make things escalate." She paused, glancing around again, half expecting Slade to circle back. "Thanks for coming by, though. Not everyone would." A delicate tension settled between Harper and Marcus as they stood in the aftermath of the bikers' exit. The park itself seemed eager to return to normal. A group of children resumed their game of tag near the duck pond, and an older couple shuffled past, giving Harper a concerned once-over before continuing on. The air was still thick with the memory of confrontation, but it was gradually fading with each passing minute. Marcus cleared his throat, as if weighing what to say next. "I've seen those guys around here a few times," he said, nodding in the direction of where Slade and his crew had vanished. "Never quite that aggressive, but they don't look like the type to just give up on a grudge." Harper's jaw tensed involuntarily. She knew all too well that men like Slade took wounded pride personally. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said, running a hand over Nova's ears. "But if they come back looking for a fight, I'm not going to roll over." A flicker of admiration crossed Marcus's eyes. "I figured as much. Something tells me you're not exactly the kind of person who scares easily." He hesitated, then added, "And the way you handle that dog, I mean, that's more than just a pet, isn't it?" For a moment, Harper considered brushing off the question, but she saw no malice in Marcus's expression, only honest curiosity. "Nova's a partner," she said carefully. "We learned to work together under difficult conditions." That was as close as she got to discussing her military background. A part of her still wrestled with how much of that life she should carry into her new one. Marcus nodded slowly as though collecting pieces of a puzzle. He stuffed his hands into the pockets of his jacket, glancing around. Well, I, for one, appreciate what you did, he said. You basically protected everyone here by keeping those bikers from going after easier targets. Harper glanced at the children near the lawn, then at a trio of teenagers taking selfies in front of an old oak tree. She supposed Marcus was right. She'd deflected the confrontation away from those who might not have been able to stand up for themselves. Still, she felt the weight of vigilance pressing down on her shoulders. She hadn't come to Cypress Park looking to be anyone's protector. Just seemed like the right thing to do by him, she replied, a touch of fatigue creeping into her voice. Marcus offered a small, respectful nod. Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. Not sure if you're planning to stick around, but maybe keep your eyes open on the way out. They might circle back. I will, Harper said. She shifted her footing and sized him up again, noticing the sincerity etched in the set of his jaw. And thanks for checking in. With that, a gentle lull in conversation passed between them, both recognizing the day's tension might not be fully over. Harper gave Nova's leash a slight tug, preparing to move on. Not long after Marcus bid her farewell and headed off in another direction, Harper decided she too had had enough excitement for one afternoon. The sky began to darken in the west, staining the horizon with oranges and pinks that stretched across the park. She gave a cursory glance toward the distant trees and pathways, making sure Slade and his gang weren't lurking. The park had largely emptied of the earlier crowd, and it was in that twilight hush that Harper felt the echoes of her military training kick into high gear. She noted every shape, every unusual sound, scanning for potential threats. Nova, as if reading her mind, tugged gently on the leash. Harper smiled down at the beast's expressive ears. Yeah, let's head out, she murmured. She took a less direct route back toward the main gate, hoping to dodge any potential surprises. The winding path took her past a small koi pond, where only a lone jogger dashed by, earbuds in, seemingly oblivious to the day's earlier drama. Despite the relative calm, Harper's thoughts still churned. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, cataloging each of Slade's gestures, each sneer from his crew. Men like him rarely let go of grudges, especially when humiliated in front of a public audience. It wouldn't surprise her if he tried to track her down again or stake out the park for another chance at intimidation. She wrestled with the uneasy question, should she avoid Cypress Park from now on? But the notion grated against her sense of freedom. This was a public space and she had every right to be there. As she rounded a bend, Harper spotted a bench beneath a large willow tree and decided to sit for a moment, collecting her composure. Nova hopped onto the grass beside her, sniffing the air. The dog's tail gave a wing whenever she caught an interesting scent, a reminder of the simpler pleasures in life. Harper rested her elbows on her knees, taking a slow breath. She tried to focus on the hush of the evening, on the chirping of crickets starting up in the bushes. But her mind wandered back to Marcus Bradley. He hadn't been obligated to check on her. Plenty of bystanders had simply watched the spectacle unfold. Yet he had stepped up, first from the sidelines, then with direct concern about her well-being. Something about that offered a small reassurance that not everyone in the civilian world was detached or indifferent. It also reminded her that while she valued her independence, a bit of solidarity now and then could lighten the weight she carried. She reached out to scratch Nova behind the ears, the dog's familiar warmth anchoring her. Let's finish our walk, she said softly. Rising from the bench, she noted the encroaching dusk, the lamplights flickering on along the walkways. Time to go home, she thought, and get some rest, though she doubted her mind would relax completely after the day's adrenaline rush. Harper started making her way toward the park's main entrance, the sky overhead now a mix of purples and deep blues. The evening air was cooler, and a soft breeze carried the distant aroma of street food from a vendor outside the gates. Nova's leash swayed in her hand, the German shepherd's gait calm yet purposeful. Every so often, passers-by offered a polite nod or a brief smile, unaware of the tense confrontation that had happened earlier that day. As Harper exited through the ornate iron gate, the hustle of the city became more apparent. Cars buzzed by, headlights cutting through the dimming light. People walked briskly along the sidewalks, some lost in phone conversations, others hurrying to catch a bus. Amid the urban motion, Harper's heightened vigilance didn't wane. She slipped her free hand into her jacket pocket, not out of fear but out of habit, ready to reach for her phone or anything else she might need in a pinch. She had barely turned the corner onto a quieter side street when she spotted a figure leaning casually against a lamppost. For a split second, her tension spiked. Was it one of Slade's men, waiting to catch her off guard? She drew to a halt, and Nova immediately sensed her apprehension, letting out a cautious growl. But as her eyes adjusted to the streetlight's glow, she recognized the outline of Marcus Bradley. Marcus lifted a hand in a half wave, as if to show he meant no harm. I thought I'd circle around in case those bikers tried something, he admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. Didn't want to hover in the park, so I came out here. Relief and a twinge of gratitude sparked in Harper's chest. I appreciate the thought, she said, her voice warmer than it had been before. You didn't have to do that. Marcus shrugged, pushing off from the lamppost. Couldn't shake the feeling they might come back, he said, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. I don't mind taking the long way home if it means making sure you're okay. Nova sniffed the air near Marcus, and Harper could tell the dog recognized him as the same non-threatening individual from earlier. She didn't growl this time, instead relaxing into a neutral stance. Harper considered Marcus's words. They spoke of a quiet decency, a willingness to step out of one's comfort zone for a stranger. They haven't shown up again, Harper said, glancing over her shoulder as if to confirm they were alone on the sidewalk. I think they scattered for the evening once someone mentioned the cops. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like half a chuckle. Bullies like them usually know when to bail. Doesn't mean they won't try again. He nodded at Nova. But I'm guessing you and your partner won't be taken by surprise. A ghost of a grin touched Harper's lips. We do our best. Then she gestured toward the dimly lit street ahead. You want to walk with us for a bit? Safer if we stick together, maybe. Marcus agreed, falling into step beside her, and they began moving down the sidewalk, the hum of distant traffic accompanying their footsteps. Under the glow of streetlights, Harper and Marcus continued their impromptu stroll, Nova trotting between them. The city noises, car engines, sporadic honking, and the murmur of distant conversations created a soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the tranquility of the park. Still, a sense of caution lingered in the back of Harper's mind. Even though Slade's immediate threat had receded, she knew it would be unwise to assume danger had completely evaporated. Marcus cast a curious glance at Nova before speaking. She's really well trained, he noted, genuine admiration in his tone. I've never seen a dog stay that composed in a tense situation. Harper's lips curved into a small smile. We've been through some tough spots together, she said. It takes time, dedication, and a lot of trust. Nova knows I've got her back, and I know she has mine. While Harper didn't elaborate, Marcus seemed to sense the unspoken history behind her words. They walked in companionable silence for a block or two, the only interruptions being the occasional passing car or a bicyclist whizzing by. Finally, Marcus ventured, You must have some sort of background, like law enforcement or military, to handle yourself so calmly. I mean, I thought I was going to have a heart attack back there, but you were rock steady. Harper glanced at him, weighing how much she wanted to reveal. I served in the military, she said, keeping it succinct. Nova was my partner overseas, part of a K-9 unit. She paused, then added softly, We learned to handle high-pressure situations. Marcus nodded, expression sober. That explains a lot, he said. Thank you for your service. The phrase was genuine, but Harper felt a pang at the mention of her past. Civilian life had its comforts, but she sometimes struggled with the abrupt shift from intense, structured deployments to the everyday unpredictability of city living. They reached a small intersection, where a flickering street lamp cast dancing shadows on the sidewalk. Harper paused to check for traffic, and Marcus took the moment to gauge her expression. Hard to let go of that vigilance, isn't it? He asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Harper exhaled. It is, she admitted, but I'd rather be vigilant than complacent. Days like today remind me that danger can pop up anywhere. A quiet empathy passed between them, and Nova whined softly as though chiming in on the discussion. Harper continued across the street, with Marcus following. Despite the serious topic, Harper found herself unexpectedly grateful for his company. So often she navigated the world alone, relying solely on Nova. Marcus's presence, his willingness to walk with her, felt like a gentle affirmation that not all human interactions had to be fraught with tension. As they progressed deeper into the neighborhood, Harper noticed the houses growing older and more spaced out, their front porches illuminated by yellow porch lights. She was only a few blocks from her place now. Harper glanced at her watch, noting how time had slipped away. The events in Cypress Park had created a disorienting bubble of tension that made everything else feel secondary. Nova trotted calmly on her left, while Marcus kept a respectful distance on her right. The air held a slight chill, typical of late evening, and the distant hum of traffic provided a subdued background noise. They passed a row of modest houses, each with small front yards edged by picket fences. Porch lights flickered, and occasionally a curtain parted as a curious resident peered outside. Yet the neighborhood was largely peaceful, a stark contrast to the memory of engines revving and threatening words from Slade's gang. "So," Marcus ventured, "where exactly are you headed? Just want to be sure I don't walk you past your place." There was an unspoken courtesy in his voice, as though he didn't want to overstep his invitation to accompany her. Harper paused at the next corner, glancing down a side street that curved gently to the left. "My duplex is about 2 blocks that way," she said, nodding in the direction of a dimly lit street. A lone street lamp flickered near the intersection, casting shifting shadows on the pavement. Marcus looked that way, then back at Harper. "Mind if I come along to your block, just to be sure you get there without Slade's surprise reappearance?" He shrugged, adding, "I promise I'm not stalking you. I just like finishing what I started." A grin tugged at Harper's lips, small, but genuine. "I'd appreciate that," she said, aware that normally she would insist she was fine on her own. But after the tension of the day, a companionable presence felt oddly reassuring. They turned down the side street together, the sidewalk narrower here, lined by a scraggly row of shrubs and a few stunted trees. Nova nosed the ground, investigating new scents. The quiet enveloped them, and Harper used the time to reflect on how seldom she allowed herself to accept help. She'd lived so much of her life in self-reliant mode, both in and out of the service. Yet Marcus's calm, unassuming support had proven to be a welcome change. As they continued, the warmth of porch lights and the faint chatter of a television from within a nearby home painted a picture of domestic tranquility. It made Harper ache momentarily for something stable, an anchor in a world that often felt unsteady. She caught Marcus stealing a glance at her every so often, as if trying to read her mood. They reached a stop sign near the next intersection. 2 blocks down, the faint glow of another street lamp revealed what Harper recognized as her own driveway. She paused, exhaling softly. "Thanks again," she said, looking at Marcus. "I mean it." Marcus nodded, stepping aside as Harper led Nova closer to the driveway. "No problem," he replied. "It's the least I could do. Never liked bullies, and I really don't like the thought of them lurking around." He peered over Harper's shoulder, scanning the quiet street. "Looks like they're not here, though. Maybe they really did call it a night." Harper studied the empty road in front of her duplex. It was a modest building with pale blue siding, a small porch, and a soft glow from the living room lamp she'd left on. A sense of relief tugged at her muscles, though she was careful not to let her guard drop completely. "Maybe," she allowed, "but I'm not naive enough to think they won't remember this. Guys like Slade hold grudges." Marcus exhaled, nodding slowly. "I figure. But you can't live looking over your shoulder all the time," he said, quietly echoing the very conflict that had played in Harper's mind for months now. "Anyway, you're here safe, so that's good." Nova let out a soft whine, perhaps picking up on the emotional undercurrent in Harper. Stooping down, Harper gave the dog a reassuring pat, ruffling the fur at her neck. It was a small ritual they shared, one that said, "We made it through another day. We're still together." After a brief pause, Harper straightened and looked at Marcus. "Listen," she began, her voice slightly hesitant. "Thanks again for everything. I know it's not your job to keep strangers safe, but you did more than most." It was an unusual feeling expressing gratitude to someone she hardly knew, yet it felt right, and she wanted to acknowledge it. Marcus offered a half smile. "You're welcome. And in my book, basic decency is everyone's job. You know?" He glanced at Nova, who was watching him with inquisitive eyes. "Besides, I got to meet two interesting new friends." That comment drew a genuine, if subdued, laugh from Harper. She folded her arms, leaning a bit on one hip, and for the first time that evening, she allowed the tension in her shoulders to ease. They both knew that tomorrow might bring new challenges, especially if Slade decided to make good on any implied threats. But in this moment, under the glow of her porch light, the world felt a fraction less dangerous. "Look," Marcus continued, fishing a small piece of paper from his pocket and scribbling a number on it. "I don't want to overstep, but here's my number. In case something comes up, or if you ever want a walking buddy who's not covered in fur." He handed it to Harper with a grin that bordered on self-conscious. Harper took the paper, the corners of her mouth curving into a faint smile. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, carefully tucking it into her jacket. She hesitated, contemplating the unusual path the day had taken. A mundane afternoon turned into a standoff, a stranger's support, and the faint threads of a possible friendship forming. "Thanks, Marcus. Really. Get some rest, Harper," he said, stepping backward. "You too, Nova." He saluted the dog in a playful gesture. Turning on his heel, he started down the street, the faint sound of his footsteps fading into the ambient city noise. Harper watched him go, feeling a subtle sense of disorientation. She wasn't used to letting people into her life, however briefly, and she found herself momentarily suspended between gratitude and lingering wariness. Nova nudged her calf, reminding her that home was just a few steps away. With a final glance at the quiet street, Harper led the dog up the short walkway to her front door. Unlocking the door, she ushered Nova inside, flicking on a hallway light as she did so. The small living room welcomed her with a lamp's soft glow, casting warm shadows on the walls lined with a few framed photographs. One picture captured Harper and Nova on a military base overseas, the desert sun glaring off the dog's shiny coat and Harper's fatigues. Another showed a group of fellow soldiers grinning after a successful mission. Seeing these reminders of her past stirred a familiar mix of pride and longing. She set her keys down on a side table and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water, Nova padding behind her. The day's events played on a loop in her mind: Slade's sneer, the tension in the air, the crowd's anxious eyes, and Marcus's unexpected kindness. It felt like stepping onto a battlefield for a moment, then retreating into a sanctuary that was partially self-built and partially accidental. Nova settled on a small rug near the kitchen counter, watching Harper with a calm, steady gaze. Taking a long sip of water, Harper thought about how quickly violence could erupt in the most mundane settings. She'd witnessed it countless times in war zones, but it still rattled her when it happened in the everyday civilian world. The thin line between peace and chaos was never truly gone, just hidden until someone like Slade decided to tear it open. With a sigh, she reached for a small notebook she kept near the refrigerator. She jotted down a few lines about the confrontation, a habit she'd developed to process stressful incidents without letting them fester in her mind. Once she finished, she flipped it shut and looked at Nova. "Thanks, girl," she said softly. "You did good." Nova's tail gave a gentle wag, her expression attentive. Harper crouched to pat the dog affectionately. Some part of her was relieved that the day had ended without physical violence, yet another part braced for the possibility of future encounters. Tomorrow she would return to her usual routines, but she knew Cypress Park would never feel quite as innocent as it had before. Eventually she turned off the kitchen light and made her way to the bedroom, Nova trailing behind. The day might be over, but Harper understood all too well that vigilance didn't end with the setting sun. Morning arrived with a gentle drizzle tapping against the windows. Harper stirred awake, blinking against the pale light filtering through the curtains. Nova, ever responsive to her movements, rose from a dog bed in the corner, stretching and yawning. For a moment, Harper allowed herself to simply exist in the softness of a new day. No immediate threats, no shouting engines, just the rhythmic patter of rain. Yet, as she got ready, pulling on a clean shirt, lacing up sturdy boots, and making coffee, her mind drifted back to the events at Cypress Park. She wondered if Slade had already turned the page, or if he was nursing a wounded pride that might lead him to seek another confrontation. She didn't expect him to show up this early, not in the rain, but caution had long been part of her daily ritual. She poured a second cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and set it aside as she checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. She contemplated texting Marcus with a quick thanks for walking her home. But the last thing she wanted was to invite further involvement if Slade's gang still lurked in the background. People who got too close to her often wound up embroiled in complications they never asked for. Nova seemed content enough, tail wagging as she padded around the living room. Harper caught the dog's gaze. "We could go back to the park today," she said, testing the idea out loud. There was a defiance in her voice. Why should she let a pack of bullies dictate where she went? Yet she hesitated. It had barely been a day since Slade's intimidation attempt. Maybe giving it some space was wiser. Finally, she shrugged to herself and decided to do a short walk around the block, staying closer to home. As the rain softened, Harper clipped on Nova's leash and stepped outside. The neighborhood looked different in the wet morning light, the sky a patchwork of gray clouds. She walked at a leisurely pace, letting Nova sniff at the damp grass and puddles, her own senses on alert for anything unusual. Halfway through the walk, her phone buzzed. She paused under the awning of a local bakery to check it. The screen displayed a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Marcus. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Hope all is well." Harper felt a small flutter of surprise. She'd forgotten she'd slipped his number into her jacket pocket the night before. Part of her appreciated the concern. Another part wrestled with the notion of letting someone into her personal circle. She typed back a concise reply. "We're fine. Thanks for checking in." Sending the text, she felt a tug of conflict. Gratitude mingled with a lingering caution. With a soft sigh, she resumed walking, the drizzle turning to a light mist around her. In the days that followed, Harper and Nova maintained a careful routine. She alternated her walks, sometimes venturing a bit farther from her neighborhood, other times sticking closer to home, always mindful of the remote possibility that Slade or one of his men might resurface. Yet each day passed without incident, and slowly, she started to exhale the tension that had coiled in her since the park showdown. Marcus texted again, this time asking if she'd like to meet for coffee. She considered the invitation for an uncomfortably long time, weighing her inclination to keep people at arm's length against the simple human need for companionship. Eventually, she agreed, choosing a small cafe near the city's outskirts, less crowded and less likely to draw unwanted attention. The cafe's bell tinkled as Harper pushed open the door, Nova by her side. She cleared it with the manager, who didn't mind well-behaved dogs indoors. Marcus looked up from a corner table, relief and a touch of apprehension mingling in his eyes. He stood, offering a small wave. "Glad you made it." Harper nodded, removing a light jacket and draping it over the back of her chair. "It's good to get out," she said, noticing how the cafe's warmth enveloped them. The air smelled of roasted beans and freshly baked pastries, a far cry from the tension of Cypress Park. Nova settled at her feet, her alert posture easing into relaxation in the cozy environment. Marcus slid a cup of tea toward Harper, but she shook her head. "I'll get my own," she said, walking up to the counter. She returned moments later with a black coffee and a croissant. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both apparently searching for a safe topic. Finally, Marcus broke the ice. "Any sign of those bikers again?" Harper shook her head. "No, it's been quiet. I think maybe they've moved on to hassling someone else." She frowned slightly at the thought, remembering that bullies like Slade seldom disappeared entirely. They just found new targets. Marcus nodded, pushing his cup aside. "I'm glad to hear it, though. You deserve some peace." His gaze flicked to Nova, who eyed him with the calm regard of a dog who'd decided he wasn't a threat. "So how's life treating you otherwise?" Harper took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter flavor ground her. "Can't complain," she said, choosing not to reveal the restless nights that still surfaced now and then. "It's an adjustment, being out of the service." The sentence hung, incomplete yet heavy with implications. "I can only imagine," Marcus replied gently. "But hey, if you ever need help with anything, even if it's just taking Nova on a walk or talking, I'm around." He smiled, a simple gesture that carried more sincerity than most people's flattery-laced compliments. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Harper. She felt both an instinct to guard her past and a growing sense of relief that someone genuinely wanted to help her adapt to the civilian world. Time passed in small talk and cautious laughter at the cafe's corner table. Nova napped peacefully at Harper's feet, head resting on her paws. For a while, the conversation danced around the tension of the confrontation at Cypress Park, focusing instead on lighter topics. Funny anecdotes from Marcus's job at a local warehouse, amusing quirks of life in the city, and small, everyday triumphs that made life worth living. Yet beneath the casual banter, an undercurrent of unspoken understanding tugged at Harper's thoughts. She remembered the day she and Nova first arrived home from overseas, the weight of her uniform replaced by civilian clothes and a sense of displacement. She recalled scanning grocery store aisles with the same heightened alertness she'd used on patrol, and how Nova would mirror that vigilance. Now, sitting in a cozy cafe with Marcus, she felt an unfamiliar sense of normalcy. It was both comforting and disconcerting. Eventually, their conversation dipped back into more serious territory. Marcus took a slow sip of his tea, regarding Harper with an almost shy curiosity. "I'm not trying to pry," he began, "but I've been wondering, do you miss it? The structure, the camaraderie?" A small smile ghosted across Harper's lips. "Sometimes," she answered, choosing her words carefully. "It wasn't easy, but at least I knew my role. Here." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the world outside. "It's more complicated than I expected." Marcus nodded, sympathy warming his gaze. "I get that," he said softly. "I mean, I never served, but I've had my own struggles finding my place. It's why I moved to this city, to get a fresh start." Harper considered his confession, wondering what issues had pushed him to seek a new beginning. She resisted the urge to ask, sensing that might overstep an invisible boundary they were still negotiating. Instead, she let silence be a cushion, a tacit understanding that both of them were carrying unseen weight. Nova stirred then, lifting her head and looking at Harper as if to say, "Time to move on." Harper offered the dog a fond scratch behind the ears before turning back to Marcus. "She's probably ready to head out," she said. Marcus glanced at the clock on his phone. "I should get back to work soon anyway." He rose from his seat, pausing to give Nova a quick pat on the shoulder. "How about we do this again sometime? Maybe somewhere open, so Nova can stretch her legs." Harper considered the invitation. The simpler part of her wanted to retreat, to keep life small and predictable. But a voice in the back of her mind reminded her that forging new connections was another step toward truly transitioning out of that constant combat stance. "Sure," she said, her smile soft but genuine. "I'd like that." They parted ways outside the cafe, the city's bustle swirling around them. Despite the urban noise, Harper felt something akin to quiet hope buzzing beneath her skin. Harper and Nova's routine gradually expanded to include more walks through the neighborhood, though Harper still steered clear of Cypress Park for a while. She told herself it was just a prudent choice. No need to tempt fate if Slade was still harboring resentment. Besides, Nova seemed perfectly content exploring new routes through the quieter residential blocks, sniffing at fence posts and eagerly greeting the occasional friendly neighbor. Marcus texted periodically, and they met twice more for casual outings, once at a dog-friendly beach on the outskirts of town, another time at a local farmer's market. Each meeting felt unexpectedly normal, filled with easy conversation and a subtle but growing trust. Nova, for her part, grew more comfortable around Marcus, even wagging her tail when he approached. Still, Harper remained vigilant. The confrontation in the park had underscored just how quickly life could invert itself. She carried that knowledge like a soldier's gear, always ready for the next surprise. At night, she'd lock her doors, double-check the windows, and ensure Nova's training remained sharp. The dog was her best defense and her closest companion, a thread connecting Harper's military past to her civilian present. One late afternoon, Marcus texted her with a spontaneous suggestion. "I'm headed for a run. Care to join me near the park? I'll bring coffee." Harper stared at the screen, debating. A mild apprehension flickered. Cypress Park might still be a stage for unwanted drama, but she also realized she couldn't avoid the place forever. She typed back a tentative, "Sure. See you in 30. When Harper arrived, Marcus was already stretching by a shaded bench near the entrance. He had 2 cups of coffee and a cardboard tray, one of which he offered to her. Figured we'd at least need a caffeine boost, he said. Nearby, Nova paced in a small circle, taking in the sense of the familiar territory. Harper sipped her coffee, scanning the perimeter. The broad lawns, the children playing catch, the joggers weaving around the strollers. It looked so peaceful, so ordinary. Part of her chest tightened with conflicting emotions, a faint flashback to the tension she'd once experienced in the very same space. She gave Nova's leash a gentle tug and set off with Marcus along a paved walkway. "I've been coming here again over the past week," Marcus mentioned as they walked side by side. "Haven't seen any sign of Slade or his crew." His voice was casual, but contained an undercurrent of reassurance, as though he wanted Harper to know she was safe. "Glad to hear it," Harper murmured, scanning the tree line. She recognized a few regular parkgoers from before, some of whom nodded in greeting. Though the sting of past hostility lingered in her memory, she also felt an emerging sense of reconnection. To this park, to the city, and possibly even to a future that wasn't overshadowed by old wars or new bullies. They walked through Cypress Park at a relaxed pace, Nova occasionally pulling ahead to investigate a fallen branch or to sniff at the remnants of a discarded sandwich wrapper. Marcus fell into step beside Harper with an easy familiarity that contrasted starkly with the guarded stance she had displayed during their first encounters. She allowed herself a moment to appreciate the ordinariness of it. Two people and a teen simply traversing a public park without the weight of confrontation. Yet memory lingered. Every so often, she caught herself glancing at a row of motorcycles parked near a distant picnic area, her pulse quickening before she realized they belonged to a group of weekend enthusiasts who didn't resemble Slade's gang in the slightest. Nova would pick up on her tension, turning her head as if to check that everything was okay. Each time, Harper gave her a reassuring pat. "So," Marcus said, breaking a comfortable stretch of silence, "how about we see if that coffee place near the south gate is still open? Finish the loop with a reward." Harper's mouth twitched into a hint of a smile. "Sure," she said. "Lead the way." They turned onto a narrower path that skirted a pond where ducks bobbed for breadcrumbs tossed by a laughing toddler. The moment felt so normal, so at odds with the recollections of that tense showdown not too long ago. In a corner of her mind, Harper acknowledged that perhaps progress wasn't always about grand gestures. It could be as simple as returning to a place that once felt unsafe and reclaiming it one step at a time. Marcus slowed slightly, drifting closer to Harper. He began, voice carefully casual. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about adapting. The city can be tough, but it can also be a place for fresh starts. You've got Nova, you've got your training. Maybe there's a way to use all that for something positive." Harper raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Marcus shrugged. "I don't know, some sort of canine training service or volunteer work. You'd probably be a natural at it, and it might help you feel more at ease." The idea hung in the air, and Harper realized she'd never seriously considered using her skills in that way. She had planned on quietly transitioning to civilian life, letting her military past recede to the background. Yet the suggestion tugged at her in an intriguing way. "Could be worth exploring," she admitted. "I guess I never put much thought into it because I just wanted out, away from that life." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "Sometimes the thing we run from is also the thing we're meant to embrace, just in a different form." Harper didn't respond right away. They reached the south gate, and the coffee kiosk was still open, steam rising from the machines inside. She ordered a small Americano, Marcus opted for a tea, and they found a nearby bench to sit on. Nova settled at their feet, tail thumping contentedly on the ground. They sipped their drinks in companionable quiet, the sun dipping lower on the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of gold and pink. A gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of cut grass and distant blossoms, and Harper felt a momentary peace wash over her. She thought back to the very first time she walked into Cypress Park, how she had hoped for a simple retreat from the bustle of city life, only to be confronted by Slade's hostility. Now she found herself reclaiming that space, not just physically, but emotionally. Nova rested her head on Harper's foot, sighing in evident comfort. Marcus studied Harper's face for a moment, perhaps gauging her mood before speaking. You seem more relaxed, he commented softly. I remember the first time I saw you, you had this intensity, not that it's gone, but it's shifted. Harper glanced at him, a slight self-conscious smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I'm learning that not everywhere is a battlefield, she said. Then more seriously, she added, it helps knowing there are a few good people out there, like you, who won't just look the other way when things go sideways. Marcus exhaled in something like relief, running a hand through his hair. That's good to hear, he replied. I'm glad I could be one of those people. A silence followed, one that felt warm rather than awkward. The evening lights flickered on around the park's pathways, illuminating the silhouettes of a few late joggers and a couple walking hand in hand. The hum of the city beyond the park remained present but subdued, as though acknowledging that here, in this slice of green, the pace could be a little slower. Harper studied the faint line of tension still present in Marcus's posture. She realized that in many ways they were both carrying invisible baggage, his from a life in search of a fresh start, and hers from a past defined by combat and duty. Yet sitting here together, it seemed they had found a small pocket of solace. So, Marcus said at length, I'm thinking of organizing a volunteer event, cleaning up the trash around the trails, maybe adding some flower beds. The city's short on staff to maintain the park, you know? He eyed Harper with a hopeful, slightly tentative expression. Would you and Nova want to come? You don't have to, of course, but it might be fun. Productive, too. Harper turned the idea over in her mind. Once she might have declined such an offer outright, preferring to keep interactions minimal. But now something in her softened. Count us in, she said quietly. Nova's great at picking up stuff, though it might get slobbery. She offered a wry grin. Marcus chuckled, and the sound felt like a gentle release of whatever tension remained from the day's earlier memories. Slobbery or not, I'll take the help, he said. They finished their drinks, the last remnants of daylight slipping away. In that soft twilight glow, Harper felt a new sense of acceptance. The confrontation with Slade had cast a shadow over her life for a brief moment, but it had also introduced unexpected allies and fresh possibilities. Standing up against bullies, she realized, wasn't just about defending herself. It was about stepping more fully into a life she was. In the end, Harper's firm resolve and Nova's steadfast loyalty remind us that courage can thrive even in the most unlikely places. From a tense face-off that tested her patience and skill, Harper emerged stronger and more certain of her own resilience. And in stepping forward to help, Marcus, an ordinary man in extraordinary circumstances, proved that unity can triumph over intimidation. This outcome highlights how the right mindset and mutual support can transform fear into fortitude, leaving us all with a renewed faith in community spirit. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments in the story spoke to you the most? Drop a comment below with your insights, and let's keep the conversation going. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more stories that inspire, entertain, and spark real discussion.